Welcome, everybody. Today is Tuesday, July 3rd, 2018. You are in the Kubernetes 1.11 release retrospective, part 2. If you're interested in part 1, it will be under the community meeting that happened last Thursday. I don't have the date. I'm sorry. You might have to do some sleuthing to figure that out. But essentially, this is the continuation, and I want to go ahead and give a couple of things to start here, which is first and foremost, this is a ceremony for us to get together and talk about what went well, what didn't, and what we want to change. And as such, sometimes feelings can get elevated and people can feel like maybe there are blame or other things that are not so positive. So if you have something that you want to change or discuss in a way that you want to see differently, please focus on solutions and being positive and supporting all of us. And remember that it's usually process or technology behind the root of a problem, and people are rarely to blame in the end of it. So let's go ahead and proceed. If you're looking for the document for this retrospective, it is located at bit.ly/KUBE 111 retro, Q111 retro, and we will go ahead and follow along there. I'm not going to share my screen. Oh, and Josh, also there's also available at Kate's 111-retro. So multiple ways to get to the same file. And what we're going to do is we're going to go to that document, and we're going to go to, there is a section that we use for the community meeting at the top, but if you scroll down, you'll see a lot of duplication of information after the, did we do what we said we'd do? And that's where we're going to go ahead and start. And that section is in what could have gone better. So sorry, that's probably not clear at all. I wish I could share my screen. Somebody else is welcome to.
Okay. Wait, what section are we starting? Are we starting on did we do what we said we'd do, or are we starting on what could have gone better?
What could have gone better in 111. And before we do that, since this is maybe a slightly different crowd than we had last time, is there anybody that wants to recognize anybody else for things that they didn't get a chance to talk about during the community meeting? Good things, happy things, appreciation, kudos, all that good stuff.
I'm not going to list off all the names because I'm sure I will forget somebody out of the 16 people in the team, I believe. But I thought the entire release team was amazing. I was really, as release lead, I was really able to be sort of the manager of the release and deal with escalated issues and deal with timing rather than necessarily needing to be in the weeds on individual PRs until the very last week, at which point pretty much everyone's in the weeds. So I thought everybody did a terrific job. A lot of people went well beyond their strict release team mandate to get things done. And thank you so much for making this such a smooth process.
Woo, now I can clap, Misty. I'm resetting my microphone, and I'm also clapping because you all are awesome.
Yeah.
I'd like to just give a big kudos to the community itself and the release team. I was a newcomer, and I felt extremely welcomed and really safe to ask any silly questions. Stephen would say there are no silly questions, but still, it was a very safe and good environment, and everybody was invested in the release and helping others learn and grow, which is it was really refreshing to see that for a first-time contributor.
Same.
Yeah. Well,
that's what I was going to say.
Given that half the time when you asked a quote-unquote silly question, the answer was, well, I don't know why we do that. It was good that you were asking those questions.
Yeah, I have to say, as somebody who's been a shepherd of this process now for 2 years, that is, to me, what you just said is the highest possible compliment. That this is a safe space for people to learn and grow is to me, there's no greater aspiration of anything we do in this community than that. So Thank you so much. That is really good to hear.
Yeah, I want to amplify that too and say that this was really cool that we all work at different companies in our day jobs and we all have other things that we're doing. We have time zone issues, and I felt like we all worked together really well. And we I think each of us kind of worked hard to help each other out when there were questions. So I really appreciated that. I never felt like I was left on my own to figure something out.
That's wonderful. Super good to hear. Yeah, and I've always loved that too, the sort of camaraderie across companies. This is really, when I've written in the past that I don't work for, any other company. I really work for Kubernetes, and this release team is absolutely is the pinnacle of that. So, woo. All right. Well, if anybody thinks of anything else that they want to shout out as we go through the retro, go ahead and do it in chat, and we'll call those out. But we're going to go ahead and move on to what could have gone better, because hopefully one of the main goals of this process is to do it better every time. So, Josh, I'm going to turn this over to you.
Okay.
You want to just go ahead and start from there, and I'll jump in if I need to.
Okay. So a lot of our what could have gone better is, advice to the 112 release team, which some people are continuing on. Please tinker with this. So the first one of these is the one that we touched on in the community meeting, which is the feature freeze process. As I understand it, the purpose of the feature freeze process is so that we can keep track of features worthy of mention and features requiring docs and release notes and other things.
Test and test.
Hi, Tim. Test.
Tests, testing, blocking, testing.
Oh, I thought you were testing your microphone, Tim. That was hilarious.
No, sorry.
Yes.
Trying to add in there the.
Yes, and things needing tests as well.
Yeah.
So basically, if there's a certain level of feature at which it needs all the things, and the sort of purpose of feature freeze was to actually capture those so that we didn't lose track of them, so that we made sure that they had all the things by the time the release came out. Was also the purpose was there was a PR purpose, but we kind of dropped that because of the problem that we realized with the sort of declared feature freeze a month into the release, which is that like for 111, we had, I think, originally 43 declared features. And of those, 18 had dropped out by code freeze. So almost half had dropped out. And in the meantime, we got, I think, 3 things that were not on that list that qualified as major features that people just got done for code freeze. So, and then the other thing that has happened over the release, actually, based on our experience either with 1.9 or 1.10, I don't remember. And by the way, Caitlin is joining us, but she's been delayed by a CNCF PR emergency. And will join us as soon as she deals with that.
I'm on now, Josh.
Oh, terrific. Okay. So was it 1.9 or 1.10 was the last time we did a looking forward post?
That was 1.10.
Yeah. And we wanted to drop that this time because we realized that the looking forward post would not be accurate.
That's correct.
Yeah.
And it didn't get a huge amount of views either.
Yeah.
So I think overall we just decided to cut that.
Yeah. So the question, and this is something we're turning over to the 112 team, is how do we want to rejigger that? If we're not doing feature freeze for PR purposes, we don't need to worry about that. We don't need to worry about what's on the feature freeze tracking until code freeze time when we're actually preparing the announcements, or code slush or whatever week it is that we prepare the announcements. And our main purpose is to make sure that we're tracking that stuff. How do we want to rejigger the process so that we still get the SIGs helping us keep track of features, but in some different way?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things here. One is that historically speaking, so this process, the features process, goes way back almost to 1.0. And the original genesis of this came from the fact that giant segments of what we think of as ordinary functionality now were being delivered back then. So when a feature back in the 1.0 to 1.4 timeframe was a big thing. It was all the things that we think of as being sort of fundamental features now. So what we've seen is this trend toward sort of sharpening the blade instead of making the blade. And so the processes that applied to those broad sweeping, large scale implementation efforts don't really necessarily apply anymore. So what we have now though is a lot of tinkering with features that can actually negatively impact the project and our user base without a lot of visibility. So we have what I think that we need to do, and we can do this in a future SIG release meeting, is to really identify what is it we're trying to accomplish with this, because honestly, this process has probably gone on longer than it should, the way it is. And that's largely because Ihor's been carrying the mantle of this, and that's a huge burden for one person. So changing the process and also maintaining it is a lot of work. So, so we need to redo this, and we need to actually determine what are the specific things like tests, as Tim said, that we need to identify, and also how do we catch things that are actually massively user impacting that are not quote unquote features. So that's, to me, is the big thing.
Yeah. So, I mean, two individual things fell out of that we didn't have time to discuss in the community meeting. One is, Zach, you here? Zach Arnold?
He doesn't see
okay.
Don't see him on the
So we have Zach for one. Zach identified one other problem with the current sort of feature feeds, feature tracking process, which is it's pretty much entirely separate from release cycle to release cycle. But he pointed out we need to keep track of the state of a feature as it advances from alpha to beta to GA over multiple release cycles. Because one of the things that we do is sometimes if a feature is alpha, we give it lighter doc and testing requirements. But that means the next release team in the next release cycle needs to know that that alpha feature had lightened requirements, so they know that when the feature goes to beta, its tests and its documentation need to be added to.
Yeah, I think it was actually me who flagged that.
Yeah.
There are features where like there's sub features that are alpha, but the whole overall feature is considered beta, and weird things like that we found out.
Yeah, so this goes back to my proposal and process thing around tying KEPs to features, because technically these things should not be happening without a KEP anymore. So if we get wind of somebody trying to do something big in a release and we ask, where's your KEP on this and where's the thing, they should in theory give us one of two answers: is that this predates the KEP process and there's either a proposal or some sort of SIG documentation, or oops, we didn't know that, we'll go bake one up for you so you have one in the release. And then from then, all of the PRs and anything else that is for that feature should reference that KEP. So in theory, you search for that KEP and you'll have every single thing: issues, the feature, the PRs, the documentation should have that KEP associated with them. So that's how we actually make this work. And that survives milestones, it survives release teams, it survives everything, because the KEP is an immutable record of whatever the delivery is over time, plus metadata.
Okay.
How do we link to this KEP? Do we literally just like write in every PR and issue, this relates to KEPs such and such?
Yeah, or somewhere there.
Okay.
And just put a link.
I'm just asking because it's a very manual process.
Well, it's not that manual. I mean, we do this with issues all the time, where you have to reference an issue to explain what is the PR fixing, and so this is really what is the PR fixing.
Yeah, although as a comparison, I will point out that I would say probably about a quarter of the PRs that do fix issues forget to cite the issue they're fixing.
Yeah, that's another problem.
And we no longer have a requirement on issue for PR, so we're in a way recreating that with the KEP link, and I foresee the same human factors problem of not having the links there.
Yeah, that's really all I was trying to point out, and it's like it does involve really doing that.
One thing I'm hopeful that we can do for a cultural change over time is have feature branches associated with KEPs, and then the work is coming through a particular feature branch. The KEP references that. If that's the central place at which work is happening, it becomes easier to monitor over time, and those could live across multiple releases as well.
We have
Makes the revert situation better.
We have a feature branch experiment going on right now, and I think the main problem is just like keeping up with the master branch that you plan to eventually merge it to. That process looks to still be pretty painful.
Yeah, and especially since a lot of KEPs are going to be overlapping in terms of areas of the project, so you're going to have the rebase race, which is a huge problem.
Well, ties into one of the other things I've talked to Stephen about wanting to get added into the process, however we're implementing it, is that we have a little more formal call out of other SIGs and stakeholders. So the issue with the priority scheduling that we had right at the end of 1.11 to me highlighted that. We had multiple players who were focused on their sub area and weren't actually looking out and above that at the interactions, and we ended up having something that was coming default on, but was blocked in theory by an alpha feature. So like there's sort of an inversion there, even just in the code that was merging, and not at a Git level, but at a conceptual level, people weren't coordinating their actions. So I feel like that's the same symptom. If you have major issues rebasing, well, you weren't talking to your stakeholders and coordinating your work with them.
Yeah, that's a very good point. I think there's cases where legit rebases are required though too, and especially in generated files. Generated files get really nasty.
Yeah, this was something I was actually going to talk to Stephen about, which is, if we're not doing it by feature branches, then we need some other way to make maintenance of KEPs semi-automated. Because if it's entirely up to people updating them by hand, it's just not going to work. As Gwen pointed out a minute ago. And you can see that with the existing KEPs. Like we have existing KEPs where they have a schedule for which release is going to be alpha, beta, et cetera, for various features. And these are not up to date.
Yeah, I think the trouble there is that it's Markdown though. And there's no good way to automate Markdown really. So you kind of can, but it's really kludgy.
Right. Well, maybe we need to stop thinking of the KEPs as a Markdown document.
Can we not like make a prow thing like /kep whatever, and if it doesn't have that, it can't get merged?
That's kind of exactly what I was thinking, Misty.
So, but how do we detect things that are definitely not KEPs, like I don't know, like minor bug fixes or PRs like that?
Well, so if it's type feature, then I guess what I'd say is that if it's in this case, it might muddy the waters a little bit because in theory you could have a bug fix that applies to a KEP, in which case it might still be type feature. But I don't know. Honestly, this part of the KEP process is sort of like hand wavy, and we probably need to work with SIG architecture to figure out how we want to do this.
The thing, Ben actually led into the second sort of sub part of feature tracking right there, which is we have a lot of stuff that goes into a release that doesn't rise to the level of tracked feature. Like doesn't rise to the level of this is something we're going to list in the PR and this is something that needs to be in the feature sheet, but nevertheless has dependencies, like requires a release note, requires a docs change, requires a test change. And as the release team, we currently don't have any organized way to track those. I'll say it's particularly bad with stuff that goes in early in the release cycle because, and now I actually finally understand the note, Jace, that you added here is, I'm looking at the stuff that's going in this week for mostly targeting 112. We apparently don't have any label requirements of any kind early in the release cycle. People are merging stuff that doesn't have a kind label. It doesn't have a SIG label.
No SIGs, no nothing, yeah.
So when it comes time to reconstruct what actually went in and whether or not that got docs, et cetera, we're not going to have any idea.
No, This is what that's why I was begging for this to happen, that every PR that goes in and gets merged needs a milestone and a SIG.
Right. So,
period.
Well, I mean, I think when we switch to Tide, isn't that going to require milestones for everything?
No.
I don't think so.
Yeah, not necessarily.
Gonna say, right? Could it?
Yes, it could.
Because there's technical requirement, there's policy requirement. Yeah, so I mean that's the other, because these things aren't going to have keps. They might not be a dependency for a kep. A lot of these are just little things like, hey, this thing that was one command line switch for kube control, we're splitting into 2 separate switches because there's actually different things people want to do. That needs a doc. It may need a test. It certainly needs a release note. And if those things don't all happen immediately when the original PR is submitted, we lose track.
So I want to throw out that I think it'd be very feasible if we wanted to start requiring kind and SIG and things to merge to Kubernetes. I'm also wondering if anyone has any insight into why we stopped requiring a linked issue. If there was a good reason for that, or if we just need better tooling.
People just worked around it.
Yeah, and one of the other problems was if you use the particular phrasing fixes : issue number, then when the PR is merged, it automatically closes the issue. Right. And sometimes the issue had multiple PRs against it, which would then be a problem for tracking.
Could we put something in the template that says something like related issues or related issues and has a markdown block to put it in, like we do with the release note?
I don't see any reason why not. There is a template for PRs.
As long as we suggest something that isn't fixes, so and forth, then we can probably avoid that.
Okay.
Yeah, making people use it is difficult, but that's a problem. And a lot of times they just yank out the whole template block, and it's a balance, right? I mean, yes, we have a need to do all these things, but then we are slowing people down because it's hard for people to find other people who can switch on the labels for them. It's getting easier by the day because the number of people who are getting into the Kubernetes org is getting, is a lot of people getting in. So it's getting easier, but then part of the problem earlier was just finding enough people to apply milestone and whatnot, and it was just slowing people down.
Well, so I guess my question is, I wasn't aware any special permissions were required to apply a SIG and kind label.
There's not, but I think you still need to know what's appropriate, and newer contributors in particular might not.
Well, but then that would be an argument that that's the role of the reviewer, right?
But they could be noticing that going by anyway, even with it not required, and they.
Right.
Unless there's a mechanism to enforce the requirement, and then you're back into the same position of people saying, this is too much labeling overhead.
Correct.
And pushing back for a lighter weight process.
Yeah.
Right. There was one person complaining about the fact that he had to sign a CLA, so that is a whole another mess.
Okay.
But the other mess here is people are tagged as reviewers, signees, don't really work the PRs and issues. That is something I don't know how to.
I think the challenge, there's sort of a meta challenge here, is that we as the release team want a whole bunch more information.
Correct.
But when we just simply push that off onto everybody else, they're not necessarily as vested in that process, and they can happily carry on without. So we have to, it's a mix of us incentivizing them and us, I think, doing kind of like we've been doing, proactively going and finding this stuff, because that's partly why the team exists, I think, to make up for the fact that others aren't going to go that extra distance on all of the minutia, because it's arguably not part of their job.
But also, if a SIG wants their feature to get into a release, then there are some that they need to cross, right?
For sure, for the big features,
feature, they'll do it, maybe.
Yep. I think for sure for the bigger picture features, and this is something I've been talking to Stephen about, I've got a whole list of things that I would like us to be pushing on for initial questions like, hey, what about X, what about Y? But for every single PR that goes by, I think that's just a scalability problem that we won't tackle successfully. But if we really are focused on the key feature things and communicating to the SIGs that the big picture stuff needs coordination, I think we've got a large portion of the problem addressed there.
So are we also on the hook for deciding what the line is there? Like, who's the decider? Is that us? Like, for whether something's big enough that it needs the whole shebang?
More or less, yeah, but it's also SIG release. SIG release, technically, this is a subproject of SIG release, although we haven't formalized that, but that's essentially it. So if there are things that bubble up past the release team, they should go to the release SIG.
Right. So one thing that really worked well this time was, us reaching out to the SIG leads, going to their channels and pinging them and telling them to pay attention to some specific stuff. That, I think, worked this time really well compared to the earlier releases.
Right.
So I think we should definitely need to continue to do that. But if we start that process earlier, then it'll be even better, I think.
Yeah. So one of the goals moving forward, and kind of Chase and I are knocking it back and forth as well as Tim, is to actually start something of a planning process on the feature side around the code freeze period for the previous release. It's not possible to do it at this point. I was like, Chase, can we squeeze this into 112? But it's not feasible to do at this point, but we can plan for that for 113. So there's a bunch of documentation that we're working up and we'll socialize around that future planning process.
Yeah, and then basically we do, like Tim said, or everybody's saying, we need to facilitate the work in the SIGs wherever possible. But I do have to raise an objection, and I feel like it's a relatively vehement one, is that there are certain minimal things that take someone 5 seconds to do in a PR for labeling, or adding milestone, that later down the road take us hours to do. There is no excuse to have a human come up and clean up something that is completely avoidable and minimally invasive. So our job.
So I guess my question is, do we expect that of individual contributors or more the approvers and SIG leads?
Well, it's triaged. The person who does the PR should understand the process enough that, one, they know how to develop for Kubernetes and submit a PR. And in that documentation, it should say, here's the things you do. And then the next thing is they try and do it, and the bot says, hey, you didn't do this. So they can't do it because they're not org members. So either they go become org members, or they ask a SIG, or they put a comment in. And then when the owners or approvers that are associated with the files being changed look at the PR and say, oh, wow, these are missing, they should add it. And if they don't add it, then the bot should say, hey, approver owner, you didn't add this. It's just an escalated thing. And the first person who touches it, who has that happen, will know the next time that they need to do it, that they're supposed to do it. So it's an education process as well. So if somebody just flails their hands around and said, I did this 10 times and I forgot every time, well, I'm not sure that's not somebody that has the level of diligence and care required to be, a regular contributor to the project, because this is just as important as code quality. Hygiene around your PRs, writing full descriptions of what you're doing and all that is equally important. That is just as important as your code.
Yeah. So I'm going to interrupt here. Number one, because we're at 33 minutes past the hour, and this is not the only thing that we have in the retro. And also, we're getting into areas that need to involve SIG contributor experience, and ultimately lots of other people that we're not going to settle here in the release team retrospective. I'm going to ask to table this discussion. So
I've got notes for all of these, so we can move on if we need to.
Okay. So other things. So next thing was shortening code freeze deadline without changing the docs deadlines causes some issues for feature developers. See discussion topics below. That ties into the discussion topic we did bring up at the community meeting, which is rejiggering the relationship between the docs deadlines, the code freeze with a shorter code freeze, possibly having a longer code thaw. That was brought up in the community meeting. This is something for the 112 lead and the 112 112 team to figure out how to put sort of a relationship in between those. Does anybody have any comments on that beyond what we already discussed on Thursday? Okay. The other thing is having automated dashboards for the things that we need to track: PR status, issue status, etc. Still a big to-do. I put in work on it in the 111 cycle. That work ended up being useless because of upstream problems, namely that the work was dependent on GitHub Archive, and GitHub Archive started failing. Someone will need to tackle that within the next cycle, because having release team members copy and paste things from GitHub to Google Docs is really not an effective use of anybody's time. If we can get GH archive/devstats working reliably enough for this, I'll tackle it again within the next release cycle. Or alternately, I was talking to somebody, I think Ben, about using a different method to pull this. So one way or another, this will happen involving, I think, people who are not currently on the release team, which I think is a good plan for stuff that's sort of tooling items.
And were you still looking at spending some time over the next cycle on that?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. You know, and then it just sort of what the tooling ends up being like that is going to depend on sort of what's available. I'll start with issues and PRs because that's the area that I know the best. And then we'll look if there's some way we can enhance CI signal. Probably not, because the extra information that Aish was posting in her reports required a lot of digging into why was this test failing. And it's hard to figure out how we'd automate that. Aish, is there anything that could have been automated with the CI reports, theoretically, that wasn't?
The only one is, the only thing that could have been automated is like looking at the failures and then probably pulling the changes or the PRs that could have gone in. But other than that, yeah, I had to do a lot of digging to see like when did it fail? What is the history? Is it a flaky test? All of that. Has it failed for this reason before? Anything of that sort was, I don't know how we could automate it.
Okay.
That manual signal that I used to do. The one more thing was the error logs. I know this is like a separate task that's going. The error logs are not very clear. I mean, it highlights a lot of errors as like possible causes, but then if you compare with a successful run, you'd see the same errors there already. So there's no way to know if that's like a red herring or it was a real thing that's causing that particular run to fail. So that was really difficult for me. Yeah. Like half the time it'll look like a network issue because it'll complain about ingress and a bunch of things, but then it will complain about that in a successful run as well.
Okay, Jace?
Yeah, so one thing that can help this is that I have a policy proposal out there that basically has very deep, I don't know what it is. It basically talks about how we determine what should be blocking and not, and entry and exit criteria for tests. And when tests are getting too flaky, they just need to be kicked out, and then they need some sort of repeated passing to reemerge. I would love to have somebody help me with some of these things that I've, like this in the features process and stuff that I have taken the time to do all the work to actually determine what a good policy is and get buy-in, but I don't have the bandwidth to socialize all these things and get them. So if anybody wants to help me try and solve some of these deeper core issues, I would seriously welcome that.
Jace, can you reach out to Aaron as he's coming back on? I've been talking to him about this exact problem.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay. And Aaron actually was one of the people that helped me develop that and sanity check me. So should hopefully be relatively straightforward.
Yeah, he was hoping to focus on that.
That's all.
Okay. Some other administrative things. Number one, this came up in the 110 cycle again, which is that we don't have any trustworthy and comprehensive place where we can map GitHub usernames to Slack handles to email addresses when we need to contact contributors or reviewers. And for the majority of reviewers, it's not a problem, right? For 90% of them, the connection between these is obvious. But then you run into a handful of people that either aren't on Slack or where their Slack name is just really different from their GitHub handle. You know, and then we don't have any way to contact them in a hurry if there's, say, a problem with their PR. I don't know. I didn't put in a proposal for what to do about this because the problem is that it's almost like we actually don't need a comprehensive list. We just need a list for that handful of people. Or alternately, a list only including SIG leads, because that would be a more reasonable thing to say it's a SIG lead requirement that you actually add yourself to this private directory that has your Slack handle and your email address.
Something of a question. Do we at least have a way to get email addresses right now?
No. CNCF maintains a directory of people who've signed the CLA, but that has the information at the time they signed the CLA, and it is not updated on any kind of regular basis.
Okay, if we can get to that point, Slack does have an API, which I've just shared, to look up a user by their email address. So we could have a tool to like find Slack handles for the release team.
Right. Well, the problem is that we don't know their email address in the first place.
Right, but since those are more subject to change, I think the bar is just having the email addresses for like the Slack leads, or the SIG leads and things.
If they have submitted a patch, we can look up the email address in the patch.
Right, the email address associated with their Git save.
That's what I typically do manually.
I think we could probably, you know, depending on authorization.
Oh,
you broke up, Ben.
Yep. Yeah.
Ben, you're on mute.
Okay. But yeah, it sounds like there actually is potentially some automation that we could do there. And automation would be far better than manually maintaining something, because anything we manually maintained would run into the same problem the CNCF list runs into, which is nobody has time to maintain it.
There is one thing about that. We've thought about doing this with owners files, like sticking emails and Slack handles and that kind of stuff in there. But it came up that could be against GitHub's terms of service.
Right.
So
yeah,
it's probably just on the GitHub side of things, but it's something to keep in mind. I'll post those.
Yeah, well, and that's why I was thinking A, SIG leads, and B, private directory, not a public directory.
Mm-hmm. I think the main issue was that we were going to automatically apply this information. I think if users supply it themselves, there's not an issue.
Well, and for that matter, looking at like GDPR and that sort of thing, if it's specifically a SIG leads thing, we can ask the SIG leads to opt in to automatic maintenance, whereas it's hard to do that with our whole mass of contributors.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I don't want to spend too much time on that. So speaking of other automated maintenance issues, Tim Pepper points out a problem with membership in milestone maintainers.
I think we have that sorted out now. Initially,
Okay.
It was just a question of where folks were trying to add themselves to the PM group versus milestone maintainers, I think.
Mm-hmm.
So there have been a number of docs PRs, I think, that now have everything pointed over to the right group.
Okay. So other things. So this is something that I point out here, both under things that could have gone better and things that we could do in the future. Some release cycle where you need to have, and we discussed it in community meeting, a major project to get people to test the betas. And that will be a major project because it'll start with trying to get some of the vendors to release beta versions, which will be a non-trivial exercise. I don't want to go over that again because we discussed it during the community meeting, unless somebody has something that they thought of since the community meeting that they really want to bring up. Okay. We have an unattributed item here where somebody forgot to put their name on it, about a GoDep vendor code update that doesn't have any information in it. Chances are that was either Nick or Misty.
It was not me. I don't know what
this
this
actually me. That was me. I'll put
Yeah.
mine next to it. Yeah, so in the last 2 cycles, we've had a few things where a GoDep was updated by somebody to address an issue that they saw locally, and then it caused other follow-on issues. And there have been some series of fixes and refixes. And I've noticed from an issue triage in both the 110 and 111 cycle, looking at these things, it just said update dependency. It didn't say why. So I'm hoping that we can just drive a little bit of cultural change, or if we see these things going by, that we say, hey, why are you updating the dependency? Can you describe it? And this is, in theory, this is just general git commit hygiene, but I think this is a particular area where there's pretty immediate consequences to having done it poorly, because somebody sees a change and reverts the change and then has rebroken the thing that the change had meant to fix.
Yeah, for 111, the one thing that happened like that was the C advisor, and we couldn't have forecasted what the problem with C advisor update was going to be, when we were, but either way, the number of people who can approve the GoDep's change is very limited. And,
and these are supposed to be our senior people who are really emphasizing that rigor.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying that it's very difficult to, from just looking at the PR, what we ended up seeing in the flakiness, and we had the reward dance done a couple of times for C advisor. So the only thing I would say is we should make sure that the GoDep updates happen earlier in the cycle and not hold on to the last minute. And typically C advisor, they wait till the last minute to do that. So if you can figure out a way to get those kinds of earlier in the cycle, that would be good. Plus, it's not just GoDep changes, also changes in images, right? Image versions. That is another source of similar issues, where we update the image version right at the last minute, and then we really don't know what went into that image. So it's a similar problem there as well.
Okay. So other things. Next thing, some downgrade test failures due to test changes getting merged in late in the cycle. The suggestion coming out of this was that there should be a test freeze date, after which only bug fixes on tests are accepted. No modification of contents of tests, etc. When that should be exactly is TBD.
Tim was pointing me to the 1.9 or release document. It said even code freeze also applied to tests in general. So
yeah, that technically is true. The code, I mean, tests are considered code like anything else.
Yeah, so probably we should tie both these together and like publicize that a little bit more rigorously.
Yeah.
So the other thing that breaks us towards the end of the cycle is like actual changes in the test infra itself, right? And is there some way we could freeze some of those activities towards the end of the cycle, or when we are close to a release?
I mean, I'm wondering which particular ones came up this time, because like that's sort of so test infra has a bit less process, but like freezing things is already sort of something that happens even just as code freezes coming up.
I think this time it was the Kubekins image we had to revert.
Yeah. And the other thing is, this didn't end up actually becoming a problem, but only because I vetoed something, which is somebody tried to add a brand new conformance test as blocking a week into code freeze.
So for that, adding things to blocking, I've just made it a standing policy that always needs to go through SIG release.
Yeah.
So I don't think that one's necessarily a problem. For Kubekins images, I mean, I would say we could freeze, but I'd also say that just like we want to never be breaking on that. So we just want to improve the process to just not break at any point in the cycle.
True. But yeah, I'll point you to the PR that got reverted.
Okay. Okay, so I'm going to take a bundle of things that could have gone better, and these are all related to release notes. And I'm actually going to start with the starter thing is that I have not been able to find a policy anywhere that we've written on what requires a release note. And I just wanted to confirm in this last meeting that such a policy does not exist, and then that should stay on the to-do list of things that we need to do.
Yeah, that's definitely something that SIG release needs to get into, and probably tie in with SIG PM as well.
Okay. Yeah, because I was starting out with misuse of release note none, but then I'm like, how can I call it misuse if we don't have a policy? Yeah. People are just using their best judgment with maybe a tiny bit of laziness, but they could argue that they had reasons. And then we had the release note extractor failing, but that is being completely reworked. The release note extractor. Wait, here we are. Mike is overhauling that.
Yeah, so that was a pretty jank tool. So I tried to like reorganize it and rework it so that I could add some like strategic tests, but I wound up just like taking the like best bits of it and making a different tool that contextualizes the release notes in a bit of more of an ideal way. So could definitely use some eyes on that PR if anyone wants to review a Go PR, but I'm happy with how that's going so far.
Yeah. Mind you, I'll point out that this once again ties into the lack of required labels early in the release and why it's not just something for the release team to clean up later, in my opinion, because if something doesn't have a kind label, then we don't know if it's supposed to be a feature. And if we don't know it's supposed to be a feature, then we don't know to nag somebody about a release note. But again, that needs to be taken up in other forums. So we need to know who's responsible for each release note. Nick? I know you're on the call, Nick, but I haven't heard you speak since we started. Okay, well, hopefully Nick will get his sound sorted out. Flaky tests, we've already visited once this time around. We're dealing with that with policy, et cetera. I don't feel like we need to revisit it. Docs and features, we addressed this briefly in the committee meeting, Misty, the business about people submitting docs long after their feature's been merged.
Yeah, so part of that, I think, is that by the time people get around to writing docs, they're no longer thinking about the feature as much as they were when they were developing the feature. They may have forgotten nuances. I also think that when people write a feature without having a well-defined target, sometimes they don't even realize that there are bugs or weird behaviors until we start asking the questions that we need answered to write the docs. Yeah. So, I mean, I know that there's tension because people would rather be writing code than writing docs about the code. And this kind of came up in the community meeting where I think it was Tim, a different Tim, who was, it almost sort of seemed like burning the candle at both ends with saying, well, we need better docs, but we don't have time to write the docs. And it sort of seems like, I don't know, it's a battle that's always being fought between docs and engineers, and we don't want it to be a battle. We actually want it to be a cooperation.
I would like to create a culture of expectation that docs come with the code, mainly because as a developer, having docs for previous features, for related things, for related bugs that I'm working on is just going to make my work easier. There's going to be less research, and in turn, I can spend more time writing code rather than digging down a rabbit hole and tracing down people that worked on it previously. I'm seeing some odds, so I must not be the only one.
Well, and I'm not sure how you can attest something without the testing people having something to look at for how this is supposed to work. It seems like it's making more work for everyone when we don't have, I mean, and the docs that we need, it's not like polished paragraphs of docs. It's like an outline or like basic, just how is this supposed to work? What were we going for when we wrote this? That's what we need as the first pass. That's all we need. We need like a back of envelope thing. This is what this was supposed to look like.
I think for features, this is maybe a little easier for us to get at as a team. We can really push for the things that are reaching our attention early, just like with Aish this last cycle on CI and tests. That similarly, we're all kind of keeping an eye out for that and pushing, saying, hey, what about some initial draft documents, even just a few sentences, that first guidance, what's going on here? But beyond that, I think it goes back to the earlier conversation about needing some cultural change in reviewers and especially approvers per SIG, that this is something that they are making as an expectation of their individual contributors.
Well, and I think also the people that we have worked with on features, probably we've converted those people, but it's always like new people that need to be converted every time. Because like I rewrote the draft docs for every single one of the new features that went in. I did substantial rewrites. Like I called it copy editing, but it was really rewrites. And it was sometimes iterative because I would have misunderstood something from the initial draft and therefore I would have gotten it wrong. But that just teased out even more detail and more information and made the end result better. And I think it actually wasn't a lot of friction for the feature developers in the end, but maybe they sort of felt like it was going to be at the beginning.
So if we're asking people initially, I know Misty, you've been shouting out like, hey, can you at least put up a draft docs PR? I don't see what the problem would be to do that around the feature freeze time, right? If it's going to be a draft anyway, having it in place, and especially if we're going to end up tying this back to KEPs or some such, having that in place and at least mentioning the KEP, I think is enough and could be.
Maybe we need a template. Maybe we just need to give people a template, which is like 4 blanks for them to fill out or something like that. And maybe even something like a Google Doc form, something. I mean, it's pretty basic answers that we need. And it's kind of, I don't know, I can think about it. Maybe we can come up with something.
I think that's a great idea. I also think that if you make it clear to people that this is an iterative process and they don't have to write like super polished release notes, then they have to defend in court or something. I think that reduces the barriers a lot. Just like get something out there.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's the holdback, that it has to be complete.
Okay. Well, to make it clear, I would actually suggest a slightly different timeline rather than making it around a particular date. Just say when somebody submits the PR for the feature, that's when you start saying, hey, could we see some draft docs for this?
Yes, plus 1 bazillion for that.
Changing the feature freeze schedule.
I still think we could do some automation around that too, where either in the feature PR or in the code PR, have something for Prow that's like /docs PR. And then either have none and make them defend why it doesn't need to have any docs, or have a link to a draft PR. Like everybody knows how to open a PR. They did it for their code.
Yeah, I do worry just a slight bit about the fact that the docs repo works differently with the branch and all that. So that is a bit of a higher bar for people who are just a little more casual about contributing. So.
And I'm working on that, by the way.
That's such good news. Woo!
I'm working on a proposal for that. I've got a Git expert that I'm working with. So that will be in a future SIG docs meeting. And then we will report our findings.
So if we're gonna say that the person who opens a feature is essentially the project manager or feature owner, I don't think that's a high bar at all. Misty, if you check out the SIG PM notes, the agenda, I mentioned some of the things that you're talking about right now. So if you want to take a look and maybe add comments, that'd be cool.
Can you send me the link? I have no idea where that is.
I just popped it in SIG release.
Okay, I'm going to move on so that we can finish up the rest of the stuff. So I suggested that we should also have a final cherry pick deadline that's published so that people know that cherry picks are supposed to get in 48 hours, 3 working days, whatever we set it at before the release. Because people were submitting cherry picks 12 hours before the scheduled release. And again, we didn't tell them not to, so it's not their fault.
And then tests take about so the bigger suites take about 14 hours, 17 hours to turn around.
So okay, I'm going to skip the other things because we already kind of discussed them. And then going to move on to what we do differently in 112 and beyond. Okay, I'm going to skip the PR triage position because I think 112 team already decided not to do that, and there were good reasons not to do that. Tracking what docs got completed for each feature in each stage. We talked about that for changes to how we handle feature tracking. Automated switchboards. One release notes thing I forgot to mention, which is we need a policy on what goes in that list of dependency version changes. Because right now we don't have one. And that could be anything from just the things where versions were mentioned in PRs, but then is it all of those things? Or everything that changed in GoDeps, which is a much longer list. I actually tried pulling that automatically, and there were 140 version dependency changes in GoDeps for 111. And Nick decided not to put those in the release notes because it was way too long. SIG release should work with SIG architecture on deciding what should actually get listed for that. Because to date, it has been different with every release. This is a hard one. Ecosystem projects.
I was just looking at this more so that I understand which different projects or releases we have to track before or with the Kubernetes release. I know kubeadmin was one, and then towards the end we got the scheduler, the preemption, all of that. So I was just curious if we can maintain a known list of this somewhere so that, and we can engage with those with the specific teams sooner than later. So yeah. So I don't know if there's any guidance for that or what others think about this.
Yeah, I don't know. I feel like we could start out by having some sort of list of the ones that we know about. So those are people we could at least nag, that we could say, hey, we're 2 weeks out from Code Slush. Are you guys planning on having an update? So at least those wouldn't take us by surprise.
Yeah, I was just mainly looking at curating this list.
Because the ones I know about are kubeadmin, rescheduler. Once Cryo goes mainstream for Kubernetes, that will also become a dependency. As will containerd when that goes mainstream. So, and probably in Windows containers too, sometime soon. So, at least those. Okay.
And these are all SIGs, individual SIGs, or how would we?
They're not SIGs, they're external projects.
Oh, okay.
Oh, right, so you're talking about other ecosystems like reschedule. Yeah, so it's actually kind of a mixed bag, right? We have external projects that are actually owned by Kubernetes SIGs. And then we have other things like for Cryo, that's actually a complete external project with its own governance, not really governed by a SIG, but they do tie their releases to Kubernetes releases. Mm-hmm. So when they go GA with Kubernetes, they're going to want to coordinate.
Yep. Yeah, I'm looking for both the flavors.
Yeah. And I think really there's no non-manual way to track those things because of the sort of diverse thing. So it's really just a question of that needs to become some specific release team member's responsibility.
Yes.
To track those. Yeah.
So in the past, what we did was we had those umbrella issues basically for the dependent projects where they would capture blocking issues or release blocking items in that issue. So basically that stays open until the very end of the project. And then that way we don't have to monitor anybody else's repo. So all these projects should have a 112 milestone issue that stays in the milestone until the very end that is considered blocking until that project actually gives us the green light. And then basically we would make the decision if they're holding our release up for a week for something on their end, then we can kick them out and say basically that our release should not be dependent on that for this time and move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, but we still need to assign an RT member to make sure that the tracking PR happens and then it gets updated.
But that's part of issue tracking as any other issue.
Okay, so the PR/issue wrangler.
Right.
Okay. Okay, beta testing we discussed. I don't know that's happening in the 112 cycle. Prow milestone manager. Is anyone working on the incomplete Prow milestone manager today?
I don't believe so. I think that Maru had plans to, but I think that got derailed.
Yeah, because that's number one, because the problem is that we have a lot of things we'd like to change about the rules for the milestone munger, but that starts with getting rid of the milestone munger.
Yes. I think the first thing we need to do is define what we actually want it to do, because we don't even have a clear definition of what its behavior should be.
Okay. Okay, so you're saying we can draft a set of rules for that regardless of whether or not anybody has the code?
Yeah, because I don't even know how to tell if it's working properly because I don't know what it's supposed to be doing.
Okay, so I'm going to bug Tim, Jace, who else has opinions about what the milestone munger ought to do?
I think those people, us people.
Yeah, okay.
We humans.
Okay.
Like Conjurbex, like Christoph, potentially.
Yes, Christoph. I nominate Christoph. And Dims, because I just like having Dims work on anything.
What did I sign up for?
Okay. Okay. So, a minor thing. Currently, the way we create all those short links for all the release materials is that the release lead uses their personal Bitly account. This would be a problem if we had to swap out release leads in the middle of a release, potentially. Would be nice to actually have something owned by the Kubernetes project or the CNCF for creating short links.
So there is you can put a PR against Kates.io for short links currently, but somebody out there who is inspired. I have wanted to make a Kubernetes specific short URL type Bitly type service for forever. And I even have the domain kates.sh that I would donate to the project in order to make this happen. So if somebody's really passionate about this, can we talk? Because I've wanted to do this forever.
Well, I'm wondering what the existing system doesn't cover, because I feel like the only thing that could be better would be if you didn't have to make a PR, and I think the problem with that is abuse.
So the PR thing is one thing. Having the links be mutable is kind of a problem. It's better to have a short link be immutable if possible. And yeah, I don't know.
One more thing from me. It should be from a trusted source. We shouldn't allow everybody to be able to mint a URL.
Yeah.
Well, only at least as far for release team links, only a handful of people need to be able to do that, right? The release lead, the shadow release lead, maybe one or two other section leads.
Yeah, I mean, you should be able to hit the link without worrying who generated the link.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a fallback, I think, in as much as, so like right now I'm finalizing those links in the 1.12 schedule. So we are the ones who create the documents that present those links to the community. So if people are in official docs, they should see reasonable links. If those docs end up needing switched to some other owner, all of the content would change and the links would be updated to a new place as well. I mean, we do have a management point, whether it's a bit.ly admin console or just the docs we use. It's not completely out of control.
Okay. Okay, so speaking of tooling, release note tooling. I tried Google Docs, we tried PRs. I think the release notes team is trying something different for next cycle. Since
well, so we've been talking about that HackMD tool, where it's like live editing for Markdown, which is cool. But I guess one thing that I wanted to understand more about, if possible, was the deficiencies in using pull requests, and if that's something that we could solve with more approvers or something, like if that's a process thing we can solve, or if it necessitates using some more live tool like Google Docs or HackMD.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think we're going to have to skip on this one because, like I said, well, Nick is theoretically dialed into the call. I can't hear him, and no one else can.
So,
Lucas?
Yeah. How about, or I could speak to something as the
cool. Go ahead.
Well, we have. I mean, sending. Well, the doc is huge. It's like 30 or 60 pages or whatever, and we have a lot of. I mean, as you said in some thread, most of it is auto generated. But for SIG leads actually to go and care about sort all those issues, and for people actually to be able to collaborate together, we need some kind of interactive real-time tool, as changes happen all the time. Waiting for 1 or 2 or 3 persons with approval access to SIG release just takes too much time. So instead, having some kind of process that SIG leads are able or have write access to whatever real-time tool we're using, and then the SIG members create suggestions, and then maybe doing like a checkpoint every day, like I think Nick did or something, or every other day makes sense. And then we actually can start the process of collecting release notes earlier as well, compared to the really last minute.
Yeah, I mean, in my opinion, we should try this HackMD tool out to see if it's good enough, if it's like a good enough editing experience, and if it's not, and we still want to use Google Docs, we should potentially one thing I want to reason about is whether or not we can have like the tool output into Google Docs and then use Google Docs to like edit the release notes and then export into Markdown, because I have exported some Google Docs into Markdown before. So if the formatting would be easier, it's something to explore as well.
Okay. So a couple of things. The Kubernetes upgrade tests, namely that Kubernetes has a set of upgrade tests that they run that are not part of the general test grid dashboard. Whereas the Kubernetes tests that are in the test grid dashboard are not the ones that the team themselves uses to see whether or not Kubernetes is working. So that seems like something to straighten out.
Yes, I think this can be part of like clearing out that upgrade dashboard itself. Indicate in,
I don't actually know if it's in the release blocking tab. I have to check that up. But like what we use to check whether Kubernetes is working or not is the branch. So GCE Kubernetes upgrade 110 to 111, for example. Let me see if I find that on SIG release all.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not in the release blocking. The last time I checked, it was in the cluster lifecycle dashboard itself.
Yeah. So, whereas the one Kubernetes one that's in upgrade downgrade is one that still has a needed fix against it. So, and it just seems like something to straighten out. Okay, so we have then other stuff that we've discussed that a lot of detail about moving tests in and out. I don't feel like we need more discussion on that, but if somebody does, interrupt me.
With regards to the Kubernetes block, not
just Kubernetes, all kinds of everything, particularly the upgrade downgrade tests. But I think that a lot of that will hinge off of Jace's policy, that we're just going to have a policy that says, what level of passing tests need to have in order to be part of one of the blocking dashboards.
Oh yeah. So last time I checked the blocking dashboard, it only had like a few like build verify integration or something. I see it's grown a bit, and I guess people haven't just. I mean, myself from the Kubernetes team haven't been aware of us growing this dashboard. So we haven't just added them there, but we use the Siglas lifecycle for tracking. Long term, I hope that we can start moving the KubeUp stuff, upgrade tests out from KubeUp to like commodity infra running on KubeADM clusters.
Okay.
But yeah.
Okay. Okay, so other things. So one of the other calendar jiggering that was suggested was I suggested having a longer code thaw, something I agree with, because this time around our code working days, but the problem is the first 2 of those working days just waiting for the PR queue to clear, meaning we actually only have 4 working days where we can actually do anything. And this time around that led to a 1-day release that wouldn't delay that would not have had to be there if we'd had a longer code thaw. Now, one question is whether or not queue clearing is going to be less of a concern once we have Tide.
So you're
Seems
saying
like it
code
ought
thaw,
to be.
you mean code slush, Josh? Just
No. I'm talking about the period between when we lift code freeze and we actually release.
It may be somewhat better, but I mean, we're still blocked on things like it takes a certain amount of time to run tests, and then once you merge, we're going to run tests again.
Yeah.
Right.
I wouldn't expect the queue to really clear too much faster.
Okay.
The one change that we plan to make down the line is to do multiple batches of different size simultaneously. Change to help clear the queue.
Okay, so this is basically, I think this is some advice to the 112 team that I think everybody agrees with, which is have a longer code thaw. We're not sure exactly how many days longer, but certainly longer than 6 working days.
Well, technically speaking, between the releases, there's this weird 1 or 2 week period where it's not actually a release. So we could look at that as a time to tweak some of these levers as well.
Okay.
We could have a bit more overlap where the one is formally ramping, like in a way we started to informing the team here, and let the other one bleed in to the start. So say we were actually releasing 111 next week by plan. I'm thinking about the 112 schedule. To get some of these extra times, do we want to try to do that, which would mean a 112 release in early October as opposed to late September?
Okay. Yeah.
And if we don't efficiently hand those off, if they do become serialized, then the next release is February as opposed to December. These have potential ripples.
Yeah. Well, this has always been a problem with the quarterly holidays. Have always been a problem with the quarterly releases,
especially fourth quarter.
Especially fourth quarter. I'm actually going to skip ahead because we are getting near the end of our time, and she's been very patient, and I think we need to address this item. Caitlin, the issue with comms and media coordination.
Yeah, so first I just want to thank everyone for making this process super smooth. Overall, the communications process went really well this time around. This piece I want to address because with our current process, we work really closely with the release lead and features lead because they're our typical spokespeople. But we're starting to find that reporters, especially those who don't want to agree to our embargo, will go to other members of the release team to try and get around that, get a quote, an interview, something like that. So I think something I'd like to do in 1.12 is loop the greater release team in this whole process into this process. And really the only expectation is that if a reporter comes to you with a request, just to loop in the communications lead. But also open to any other ideas on that. And yeah, Josh, did you want to speak to the other point?
Yeah, well, so because the other thing I would say is that some of us work for companies where we have PR staff who will be doing things around the Kubernetes release. And this can't be a hard requirement, obviously, but it could be the expectation that those PR people will check in with whoever the comms lead is, just if nothing else, to tell the comms lead that, hey, this article is going to be coming out. Yeah, Jason's pointing out that some companies restrict press things, and that's certainly the case. But like, I know at least one case with an article that I was quoted in, where it was simply a matter that Kelly forgot to mention that to Caitlin. It wasn't a case of any kind of policy, anything. So it's really useful for our comms lead to know what's coming out, even if they're not involved in it. Particularly in cases where the Kubernetes comms lead may be reaching out to a particular reporter, and that reporter may have already started the process of doing an article with one of the Kubernetes supporting companies. And in cases where we can share that information, it makes everybody's life easier to do so.
Yeah, and we have, so for anyone we use as a spokesperson on the release team, we have their PR team sit in on those calls. So they're looped in from the start. I think we just maybe need to expand this to other members of the release team who have someone on their PR team who needs to be included, or who may be receiving media opportunities separately.
I really appreciate you bringing this up. As somebody who's mostly been a heads down engineer and is now in this lead role and having press people contact him, this has been a big change for me. So having the awareness of how this stuff happens, is just not magical, that you all, this is your profession, and that we can rely on you and supplement you is really useful thinking.
Yeah.
Actually, I was going to suggest, could you and the CNCF arrange an online media training for members of the release team?
Yeah, and I'll have Kristen jump in on that. I was going to say it might be helpful for the release, like in one of the initial release meetings, to almost do like a 5 to 10 minute just media overview or something like that. Kristen, do you want to speak to what we could do from a CNCF perspective on a training? I think you're on.
Okay, well,
can I just ask, was there anything this time that went really badly from a press point of view? Like, I'm not aware of anything, but it seems like maybe something happened.
No, there was, like I said, there was actually a particular article with a particular reporter that Caitlin had reached out to. He had not responded to her, and he was doing an article with Red Hat about the Kubernetes release, and Caitlin did not know this. And there wasn't any good reason for it. It was just people did not share information.
Yeah, and it's usually not, it's usually not a big deal. We just need to know that's happening because we're spending so much time putting together this messaging to make sure, everyone's using that messaging. So, we don't want people trying to purposely go around us just because they don't want to.
Good luck with that particular reporter, but
well, that's why we want everyone on this side of things to be aware. So, Sorry, Kristen, I think is having trouble getting off.
Okay.
Can you unmute her, Josh?
If I can find her icon, yes. Oop. Not that view. Oh, there we are. Let's see.
Kristen led PR for this release, so she can speak to this a lot better than I can.
I don't seem to be able to unmute her either. So.
I just unmuted her.
Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
Hey there.
Can
you guys hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, there we go. Okay, so sorry, I'm behind a few questions. Yes, we can prep everybody. So we usually put together a media FAQ for the identified spokespeople. So that just gives everybody some key messages, some talking points, any sticky questions we'll have some answers to. So we'll just make that available to everybody. The only reason is it isn't usually widely shared is just because people aren't usually all taking interviews, but now we can just kind of share that with the whole release team. That way, if anyone has any requests, they can look at that. And then as Caitlin was mentioning, we just kind of want to be looped in if reporters are reaching out to you. I think that was Tim that was mentioning that reporters were starting to reach out to you. So just that way we can help answer any questions. We can be listening in on mute to help take any action items and just keep everybody kind of on a unified messaging front. And then we can also coordinate the opportunities, any action items, that kind of stuff. The issue that everybody was mentioning, there was a reporter who wasn't interested in holding the embargo. So that was a conversation that we had where we said, you know, we'd be happy to give you interviews to let you see the blog announcement under embargo, but they were not willing to hold any information they were given. So we offered to have conversations after the announcement was made. And so the reporter decided to go around us. So we just want to keep everybody up to date and notified of what's going on. And then we can also, you know, help with those conversations with media and just keep all of the messaging tight, and especially with the release lead knowing what kind of opportunities are happening as well, because the release lead probably has a bird's eye view of all of the moving parts and features going on as well.
Okay. Cool. Okay. All that sounds good. So I'm going to mention one more thing, and then I think we're going to turn it over to Jace to wind this up. And the one other thing that I didn't get a chance to mention in other contexts that I guess I'm dumping in Aisha's lap now. One of the things I'd meant to do as release lead was to actually have some meetings / tracking of just the shadows to make sure that the shadows were getting the training that they needed, etc. You know, and for that matter to monitor their status, because we had a couple of shadows drop out. And I just kind of ran out of time to do this. And since we have a shadow release lead, I'm suggesting that that might be a responsibility of the shadow release lead, is to sort of lead the shadows, because we do have this mentoring process, but part of it involves checking with the mentees as well as the mentors. So just a suggestion.
Yeah,
so
okay.
Yep.
Thanks, Josh. Yeah.
And it's something that I'm looking at as well. I've already reached out to a number of the leads to offer to meet with them when they're meeting with initially with their shadows to talk about roles and responsibilities and answer questions.
Cool. Okay, so all that, I am going to turn it over to Jace to wind this up.
Thank you, Josh. And I think this was a really productive release retrospective. And I thank everybody for their time. And this will be up on the YouTubes soon. So if you want to direct anybody to it, if you feel like there's areas that you want to cover, I would respectfully request that if you feel like you're on the hook to do something, put your name down in the to-dos and the thing that you're committing to do, because that is helpful for us to track. Otherwise, we'll be hitting a lot of these issues during the SIG release meetings in the future. And that's SIG release is going to be canceled today because we obviously did this in the holiday. So at any rate, thank you, everybody, and have a great rest of your day. And if you're in the US, have a good holiday.
Yep. And again, thank you so much, particularly to everybody on the 111 release team, but everybody else and doing so much to actually make this a great release. Best release team ever. Tim, hopefully Tim will be able to say that the 112 release, but right now the U111 are the best release team that we have had so far. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.